All right, picture this. You spent years building up a really solid investment portfolio. It's growing, it's doing great. And it's a result of smart choices and maybe a little bit of luck. Now you need some cash, maybe for a new business idea, that dream house, or perhaps just to live a little more comfortably. What's the usual move? You sell some stocks, you sell some property, right? But wait, what tags come along with selling? Capital gains taxes can chop a big piece out of all that growth you've worked for. It's a real buzzkill when you're trying to build wealth. But what if there was a different way, a path the truly wealthy often take in this exact situation? A method that lets them use their wealth, live off of their investments, and even pass it on, all while dodging, sometimes completely, those annoying taxes on the growth. This isn't some pipe dream. It's a real strategy, and it goes by a pretty blunt name: buy, borrow, die. Hi guys, I'm Manu, and welcome to another episode of Sweet Money. I'm a Canadian and US CPA with a cool little accounting firm, better known as Shandel CPA. Forget what you've been told about debt always being a bad thing. For a certain group of people, debt isn't a problem. It's actually a clever tool. It's like a key that unlocks cash and tax benefits in ways that most of us never even think about. We're going to pull back the curtain on how the rich use this powerful technique, making it seem like they're living in a whole different financial world. What if you could get cash from your wealth without selling off your assets? What if the tax bill on decades of investment growth could just legally vanish? Stick with me, because here's how they do it. So the strategy that we're breaking down is called buy, borrow, die. Sounds a bit intense, maybe even a little grim, but it's an incredibly effective way for people with a lot of money to manage and pass on their wealth while being super smart about taxes. Here's a basic idea of buy, borrow, die. Okay. First, you buy assets that are likely to go up in value and you hold on to them. Next, you borrow money against those assets. This gives you cash to live on or to invest more. And the cool part is it doesn't trigger capital gains tax. Then, inevitably, you die. Those assets can be passed on to your heirs with something called a step-up basis, or the adjusted cost base, ACB as we call it in Canada. This can wipe out the income tax on all the appreciation that happens while the original owner was alive. It's like a 3-in-1 solution for getting cash when you need it, your investments keep growing, and you're cutting down on taxes. This isn't about some secret backroom deal. It's about understanding the tax rules and using them to your advantage. And to be clear, this isn't some illegal tax evasion. It's tax avoidance. Legally arranging your finances to pay the least amount of taxes the law requires. And believe me, the wealthy have turned this into an art form. The whole buy, borrow, die game plan starts with the first word, buy. But it's not just about buying any old thing. The real focus is on snapping up appreciating assets. And we're talking about stocks with huge growth potential, real estate in hotspots, valuable art, private company shares, or even rare collectibles. These are things you expect to become more valuable over time. And the way you think about this is super important. This isn't about quick flips or day trading. It's a long-term play. Often you're looking at decades ahead, and sometimes even across generations. People using this strategy aren't trying to make some income. They're building a mountain of assets that just keeps getting bigger. They get that real wealth isn't just what you earn, but what you own and what that ownership can do for you over a long, long time. Now, Holding on to those assets is key. By not selling, they dodge those capital gain taxes year after year. This lets their money grow much faster thanks to the power of compounding. Think about it. An asset growing at 7 or even 8% a year with no taxes taken out will double your value way quicker than if taxes were nibbling away at the gains. And this patient approach of building and keeping capital is what sets up the next step in the strategy. They're playing the long game, knowing that the first purchase is just the start of a much bigger financial plan. Okay, you've done your buying. Now we get into borrowing. And this is where things take a detour from what most people think of as good financial sense. When wealthy folks need cash, maybe for living a new investment or donating to charity, they don't often sell their assets that have gone up in value. Selling, as we said, means taxes. Instead, they borrow against them. So how does that work? They use their investment portfolios, their stocks, their bonds, sometimes even their fancy real estate or art collection as collateral to get loans. These are often called security-backed lines of credit or margin loans. An SBLOC, for example, lets someone borrow money on the value of the stocks and bonds in their brokerage account. And here's a really clever bit. The money you take from a loan usually isn't considered taxable income. You're just taking on debt that you have to pay back. So they can get their hands on potentially millions in cash without paying a dime in capital gain taxes right then and there. And all while their original assets hopefully keep growing. And this is a world away from someone earning a regular paycheck who pays income tax on every dollar they make. They can use this borrowed money to pay for their lifestyle, make new investments that could bring in even more money, or spread their investments around. Often, the interest rates on these kinds of loans, especially for people with lots of money and assets to back them up, can be pretty low, sometimes lower than what their investments are earning. I had made a video of good debt versus bad debt, and this ties into that. Bad debt is usually stuff like credit card bills or the big vacation or a car loan. These are assets which do not provide long-term benefits, right? Things that go down in value. Good debt for the wealthy is money borrowed, but to buy assets that grow in value. It's a mindset. It's to get cash from existing assets without paying a lot of taxes and ultimately making them richer or more financially flexible. By borrowing, they keep their main assets for them and putting off taxes and letting their wealth grow even more efficiently. Imagine someone with a $10 million portfolio of stocks, real estate, and a couple of businesses. And all this started with a $2 million investment. Okay. Now they want to sell $1 million of that portfolio. At the prorated level, you're looking at an $800,000 profit with an ACB of $200,000. Of that $800,000, 50% is tax exempt. So you get taxed on $400,000, which means your tax bill is roughly $200,000. Right? Now, why would you want to give $200,000 to CRA? It makes no sense to me. But if you borrow $1 million against the portfolio instead, and you get the cash that you need and pay no immediate capital gains taxes, the entire $10 million portfolio stays intact and hopefully continues to grow. Now, let's talk about the third component of this, which is dying. Okay. It's a controversial key to the tax-free inheritance, right? And the last and probably most talked about part of the strategy, which falls under your estate planning. Okay. Now, here's the deal. When someone passes away and leaves assets to their heirs, the cost basis of those assets, what they're considered to be worth for tax calculations gets stepped up to whatever the fair market value is at the date of the owner's death. Meaning when the heir receives the asset, their ACV now becomes the fair market value as of today. And this is a huge deal. Now, in Canada, there's no gift tax, right? So as you start your estate planning, you can gift certain assets, which won't trigger capital gains, such as your primary residence. Through insurance policies, you can cover your tax bill and your children receive everything without having to sell off the assets in order to pay the estate's taxes. Let's go back to our example. The person with the $10 million portfolio who had originally invested $2 million passes away. Okay. Their heirs inherit it. Thanks to the step up in the basis, their new ACB is $10 million. Now, if the person who inherited the estate, if they immediately sell the portfolio, they'll get $10 million. The ACB is $10 million. Therefore, they don't trigger any taxes and they walk away with $10 million. Okay. On the other side, when the taxes are being paid at the estate level, like I told you, because there's no gift tax, some of the assets could have been transferred tax-free, saving you taxes. And number two, through insurance policies, you can get a policy that will cover the tax bill. So the insurance has covered your tax bill. So therefore, and usually when you get the insurance policy, the premiums are less than what the payout is, right? Because that money that you're investing through the insurance premiums that you pay every year grows and compounds, but it grows tax-free. Now, any loans taken out against the assets are usually paid from the estate, or the heirs might decide to keep the borrowing strategy going for themselves if they have a beast mode mentality. And the end result is a massive amount of wealth passed down through generations with a drastically smaller tax hit on all the accumulated growth. And this is why the buy, borrow, die is often seen as a key to building and keeping wealth in a family for a long, long time. Now, this rule is definitely controversial, okay? Critics say it's a loophole that mostly benefits the super rich and letting huge fortunes, pass from one generation to the next without paying taxes on the growth, which makes wealth inequality even worse. And the supporters argue it stops a kind of double taxation. Number one, the estate tax, and then in addition to that, you have the capital gains tax. And I've had cases where someone's passed, there were old generational properties, and they had to find the original purchase document, right? And this was before computers were part of mainstream commerce. So they just couldn't find those documents, and it became very contentious as to what is the true ACV. And but now with modern technology, when these assets pass on, what the ACV is digitally recorded, and this no longer becomes an issue. But regardless, I mean, the bottom line is it's legal, and it's a very powerful part of wealth management strategy. Well, buy, borrow, die sounds amazing. This isn't a financial trick for anyone. Okay. It's pretty advanced approach that's mainly for people who are already quite wealthy. High net worth or ultra high net worth individuals take advantage of this. A few things make this tough to make it work for the average Joe, right? First, you need lots of assets that are growing in value. We're not talking about a few grand in your savings account. To make the borrow part work and make it work well and get a good loan term, you usually need millions of dollars, right? And these have to be things in appreciating assets such as stocks, properties, and businesses with a positive cash flow. And second, getting good loan terms like those with the low interest securities backed lines of credit, the SBLOCs I was referring to, is usually easier if you have a big diverse portfolio, right? Banks are happy to lend big money at very good rates when you have solid collateral. And number three, managing the strategy well takes a lot of financial know-how and, ongoing help from professionals. This isn't something you set up and forget, right? It means carefully thinking about where your money is, managing loans, keeping an eye on interest rates, knowing about changes in tax laws, knowing how industries are shifting and which businesses to invest in. Wealthy people using this strategy usually have a team of financial advisors, tax lawyers, and private bankers helping them out. But with every good side, there's a flip side, which are the risks and considerations. Now, the buy, borrow, die strategy, as powerful as it is, isn't a sure thing, right? Some people do end up going bankrupt. It's a bit of a high stakes game. The rewards can be huge, but you've got to be careful about the downsides. One of the biggest risks is market volatility. The whole strategy depends on your assets keeping their value or even better, going up, right? But if the market crashes and your portfolio value drops sharply, you can get a margin call. A margin call from your lender is when they demand you pay back part or the entire loan immediately. And if you can't do that, then either you got to A, put more collateral in, or B, you got to sell your assets at a distressed price, right? At a reduced price. And you don't want to do that and possibly losing or wiping out the tax benefits and your portfolio. A classic example that's been happening and continues to happen is in the real estate sector. Investors purchased, in some cases, multiple pre-construction properties, or they invested in real estate projects, right? And their values over the past 24 months have dropped 10 to 30%, depending where you are or where you invested in Canada. Okay. Now, how do you come up with the extra down payment when you're highly leveraged? Another major risk is interest rate charges. Most loans against assets like LCs have variable interest rates, right? And if the rate goes up, borrowing can get much more expensive. And this could make the strategy less appealing because the growth may not be as high, or even impossible to keep up if the loan payments get too big or cost more than what the asset is actually earning. So you can't just assume that borrowing costs will always stay lower than how fast your assets are growing. Complexity in management is another thing. Like we said, this isn't a hands-off approach. It needs constant watching, active management, professional advice, changes in your financial situation, the market or tax laws can all mess up with the strategy that you've put in place. And then you also take on the whole legislative risk, right? Because tax laws are not set in stone. They change. Rules like taxing primary residents have been debated and targeted for changes by politicians, right? It hasn't happened yet, but you can't guarantee that for tomorrow. There's always a chance that future laws could reduce or get rid of some of the tax advantages that make buy, borrow, die so effective. Betting your entire strategy on rules that could be changed takes a certain level of risk tolerance and comfort level. Finally, there's the risk of borrowing too much. Let's go back to the 2008 financial crisis, right? Debt is a great tool, but too much of it, even good debt, is risky. If someone borrows too heavily against their assets, even a small dip in the market could put them in a really tight spot. So being disciplined and not overdoing it is key to this whole strategy. Now, understanding these risks is super important. For those who use this strategy, it's a calculated risk, weighing the big tax savings and the access to cash against these potential pitfalls. Now, buy, borrow, die isn't some weird idea that only exists in textbooks. It's a known and used approach in wealth management and often talked about in financial planning, okay, by portfolio managers and tax experts and real estate developers, okay? Now, while billionaires or super rich families don't usually, shout their specific tax plans from the rooftops, they're behind buy, borrow, die match up with how they manage to live off of their wealth while their fortunes keep growing, right? And mostly without being hit by yearly capital gain taxes. Think about big time investors or founders or of huge companies, right? Who own tons of stock that's gone way up in value. If they had to sell off big chunks of those shares to pay for their lifestyle or fund new projects, the capital gains taxes would be massive, right? And by borrowing against those shares, they get the cash that they need while keeping their main investments. And it benefits them, for more growth, and they defer their tax bill. Now, Elon Musk is very popular for using the strategy. Now, this idea of leveraging isn't just a personal wealth game, right? It's a basic principle in business and real estate as well. Real estate investors often use mortgage as a type of debt to buy properties, hoping the rent will cover the loan payments and the property will go up in value, which will generate equity. And, and the business takes on the debt to grow and buy new equipment and pay for research and development, and hoping these investments will earn more money than the borrowing cost itself. At the end of the day, it's all about a mindset. Debt is seen as a tool, a lever to boost returns or reach specific financial goals, right? Not just as something bad. The wealthy often have a different view of debt, right? Clearly separating debt for spending, which they try and avoid, from debt used smartly for investing and managing taxes, which they highly embrace. However, it's the strategy surrounding DIE, along with the no gift tax, that sparks a lot of public discussion about tax fairness and wealth inequality. And critics argue, it lets accumulated wealth avoid income taxes almost completely across generations, helping wealth get even more concentrated in fewer hands, right? But the conversation isn't just about how money works, right? It's also tied up with bigger questions for society about how we should tax wealth. It's fair to ask why we even have these tax rules that allow strategies like buy, borrow, die, especially when they seem to only help the wealthy so much, right? This part of the strategy, especially not taxing loan money, not paying taxes on insurance premiums at death, or not having a gift tax, these aren't mistakes, right? They're long-standing features of many tax systems, and each of it has its own history and reason. And the fact that loan money isn't taxed is a basic accounting idea. Okay. When you borrow money, you also have the responsibility of paying it back, right? You haven't earned any income, right? In addition, all you've gotten is temporary access to cash that you have to return. So taxing the loan money as income would completely change the game as to how we treat debt everywhere in the economy, from mortgages to business loans. And quite frankly, if we started taxing debt, loans, the economy would collapse. It wouldn't survive. Right? Number two, avoiding a debt tax, right? On top of estate tax, for really big estates that already pay estate tax, taxing unrealized capital gains could feel like being taxed twice. And once again, it would stagnate investments. As a result, would stagnate the economy. And just imagine if the next generation that received the assets didn't have the step-up basis, right? Would they even want those assets? Would anyone want to collect any assets? Because the tax bill would be so high, right? So this could lead to money not being used efficiently in the economy, right? So the argument is that this step-up basis helps assets move around more freely. But despite all of this, these reasons, these valid reasons are being challenged more and more. And for some reason, it seems to be the left. The NDP was very heavy on this. I mean, he had no economic sense, but all he did was wanted to tax the rich. And all that would have done is would have stagnated the economy and forced these ultra wealthy individuals to invest outside the country where tax laws would be more favorable. But the bottom line, the legality of buy, borrow, die comes down to these existing legally approved rules. Okay. It's about smart tax planning or avoidance, setting up your finances to pay the minimum tax allowed by law. And this is different from tax evasion, right? Tax evasion is illegally hiding income or assets to avoid paying taxes. And this is not being done. This is not the game plan or the mindset. Now, if you feel you have the assets to take advantage of this buy, borrow, die strategy and you find it very eye-opening and you've got the assets, and you want to understand more about how wealth is managed and the tricky bits of our financial systems, then definitely hit me up, right? Drop me a comment. You can contact me through my website and I'll be more than happy to look at your portfolio and see if this makes any sense for you. And even if you don't qualify for buy, borrow, die, please give me some SLC, which stands for subscribe, like, and comment. We've covered a lot. These are very complex topics. If you have questions about your own taxes or your own estate planning or your own situation, please feel free to reach out, right? I'm always there to help. And I always like to hear stories and see how I can be of assistance to you, right? So drop a comment and let's get the discussion going. Now, don't run out. Now, disclaimer, do not run out onto the streets and start taking copious amounts of debt because Brother Manu said so, okay? Speak with your accountant, your trusted partners, financial professionals, your lawyers before you go into beast mode and make sure you stack the deck of cards in your favor, right? And remember, it all starts with a simple conversation.